The bathroom.
Well,
That's the perfect place for it, actually.
so what's your 5-year outlook at the devices you'll carry?
You know, it's interesting. The PC has proved to be very resilient. Because as Bill said earlier, I mean, the death of the PC has been predicted every few years.
And here, when you're saying PC, you mean personal computer in general, not just Windows PCs.
I mean personal computer
Yeah.
in general.
Okay.
And you know, there was the age of productivity, if you will, you know, the spreadsheets and word processors, and that kind of got the whole industry moving. And it kind of plateaued for a while, was getting a little stale, and then the internet came along, right? And everybody needed more powerful computers to get on the internet. Browsers came along, and it was this whole internet age that came along, access to the internet. And then some number of years ago, you could start to see that the PC, that was taken for granted, things had kind of plateaued a little bit, and innovation-wise at least. And then I think this whole notion of the PC, we called it the digital hub, but you can call it anything you want, sort of the multimedia center of the house, started to take off with digital cameras and digital camcorders and sharing things over the internet and kind of needing a repository for all that stuff. And it was reborn again as sort of the hub of your digital life. And you can sort of see that there's something starting again. It's not clear exactly what it is, but it will be the PC maybe used a little more tightly coupled with some back-end internet services and some things like that. And of course, PCs are going mobile in an ever greater degree. So I think the PC is going to continue, this general purpose device is going to continue to be with us and morph with us, whether it's a tablet or a notebook or a big curved desktop that you have at your house or whatever it might be. So I think that'll be something that most people have, at least in this society. In others, maybe not, but certainly in this one. But then there's an explosion that's starting to happen in these, what you call post-PC devices, right? And you call the iPod one of them. There's a lot of things that are not...
You can get into trouble for using that term. I want you to know that.
What?
I'm kidding. Post-PC devices.
Why?
People write letters to the editor. They complain about it. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think there's just a category of devices that aren't as general purpose, they're really more focused on specific functions, whether they're phones or iPods or Zunes or what have you. And I think that category of devices is going to continue to be very innovative, and we're going to see lots of them.
Give me an example of what that would be.
Well, an iPod is a post-PC device. A phone is a post-PC device.
Is the iPhone and are some of these other smartphones, and I know you believe that the iPhone is much better than these other smartphones at the moment, but are these things, aren't they really just computers in a different form factor? I mean, when you say we use the word phone, it sounds like...
We're getting to the point where everything's a computer in a different form factor. So what? Right? So what if it's built with a computer inside it? It doesn't matter. It's what is it? How do you use it? How does the consumer approach it? And so who cares what's inside it anymore?
So what are the core functions of the device formerly known as the cell phone, whatever we want to call it, the pocket device? What would you say the core functions? Like 5 years out, what are the core functions of that pocket device?
How quickly all these things that have been somewhat specialized, the navigation device, the digital wallet, the phone, the camera, the video camera, how quickly those all come together, it's hard to chart out. But eventually, you'll be able to make something that has the capability to do every one of those things. And yet, given the small size, you still won't want to edit your homework or edit a movie on the screen of that size. And so you'll have something else that lets you do the reading and editing and those things. Now, if we could ever get a screen that would just roll out like a scroll, then you might be able to have the device that did everything.
Well, in the very first D conference, we had these guys from E-Ink here.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've both talked to them. They were talking about that. That was 5 years ago. It's always 5 years out. Do you?
Yes, we can't. There's some advances in projection technology that are more likely to deliver it, I think, than the flexible material guys. But it's not even on the horizon, no matter which of the two approaches are pursuing. We have some Microsoft research people who work on that, and there's a lot of investment, but it's at least in the 5-year time frame.
5 years from now, what's going to be on that pocket device?
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I wouldn't have thought that there would have been maps on it 5 years ago. But something comes along, gets really popular, people love it, get used to it, you want it on there. So people are inventing things constantly, and I think the art of it is balancing what's on there and what's not on there, is the editing function. And clearly, most things you carry with you are communications devices. You want to do some entertainment with them as well, but they're primarily communications devices, and that's what they're going to be.
Outside of the computing area, what are the exciting areas in the internet space at all that you're looking at that you find that's interesting to each of your companies and in general for you? Any kind of social networking, any kind of the wikis, those kind of things we've talked about in the past couple of, today, essentially.
You know, we're working on some things that I can't talk about.
Again.
But, again, yeah. But there used
Very
to be,
beautiful.
There
I
used to
know.
be a saying, isn't it, at
Kind of
Apple?
blow us away, though,
Blow us
when
away.
you can talk.
Wow, it's
There
great.
used to be a saying at Apple, isn't it funny a ship that leaks from the top? So,
That's kind of like a sweater without sleeves is a vest. I don't get that.
that was what they used to say about me when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
There's a zillion interesting things going on the internet. The most interesting things to me are these incredible new services that people are bringing up. And
Surrounding entertainment or
there's a lot of them surrounding entertainment, but there's a lot of them that have to do with just sort of figuring out how to navigate through life a little more efficiently. And I think, it's really great when you show somebody something and you don't have to convince them they have a problem that this solves. They know they have a problem. You can show them something, they go, oh my God, I need this. And I think you're going to see a lot of things like that happen over the next year or two.
Do you, you obviously have a very large internet business with iTunes, and you sell a lot of stuff on in the Apple Store. But, you were early with this idea that when you bought a computer from Apple, you had this kind of internet service back end, and it was called .Mac. And I think a lot of people feel you haven't developed it very much.
I couldn't agree with you more, and we'll make up for lost time in the near future.
And in your case, you obviously have huge things like Hotmail, for instance, which is, I guess, and Windows Messenger, which are both widely used, and I don't even know how many users.
a gazillion.
Huge numbers. But on the other hand, you haven't, as Steve Ballmer was talking about today, you have other people have much stronger positions in things like search and other parts of the internet. So, are you guys, because you are the personal computer companies that are best associated with that, not as nimble as some of these competitors at this point? Do you worry about not being as nimble, both of you? I mean, obviously Microsoft's a much bigger company, but you're a big company. Steve, Apple is. Do you worry about not being as nimble as somebody sitting out there with, the kind of 10 employees that you guys had in 1977?
Well, there's always going to be great new things that come out of other companies, and you want to be in a position to benefit from those, to have those inventions drive demand for Windows and personal computers, and then some of those upstream things you want to participate in. I hope Steve mentioned we are going to participate in search, hopefully to a higher degree in the future.
He did mention that, yeah.
Than at present, so we'll see what we can do there. A lot of the applications are more specialized, so they're not areas we'll go into. Take what can happen with education now, that video is mainstream, and all these tools that let you do rich interactions are very mainstream. I'm very excited about that. The idea of empowerment goes back to the very beginning of our industry, and some of those dreams that this would be used by students or that teachers could get better and learn from each other in these new ways. We're just at the threshold where some of those things can happen. And yes, our companies can contribute to that, but as a whole, it's the ecosystem jumping on and building on each other where you can finally say, finally, technology did something for education.
See, I look at this a little bit differently, which is we're not trying to do a lot of this stuff because it's not what we do. We don't think one company can do everything. So you've got to partner with people that are really good at stuff. Like, we're not, maybe Microsoft is great at search. We're not. We're not trying to be great at search. So we partner with people that are great at search. And we don't know how to do maps on the back end. We know how to do the best maps client in the world, but we don't know how to do the back end. So we partner with people that know how to do the back end. And what we want to do is be that consumer's device and that consumer's experience wrapped around all this information and things we can deliver to them in a wonderful user interface, in a coherent product. And so in some cases, we have to do more work than others. In the case of iTunes, there wasn't a music delivery service that was any good, and we had to do one, so we'll do one. But in other cases, there's companies doing a way better job because we're not as good at this stuff as other people are, and we'd love to partner with them. And so, we selectively do that. And I think it's really hard for one company to do everything.
Let's talk about
Life's
entertainment.
complex.
You're both in the entertainment world. Entertainment is important to both your companies. For yours with music right now, and as you get into Apple TV, Microsoft has been within the Hollywood area. Where do you see that going in the era of YouTube? We've had a couple of network people here talking about changes that are happening in Hollywood and everything else. What is happening now to entertainment delivery, and where do you all play? Because you'll be the delivery mechanism in one way or the other for most people.
Well, the big milestone is where the delivery platform is the internet, and so you bring the richness and the interactivity. I think you can get a little bit of a glimpse of the future of TV more from looking at community-type things like Xbox Live, where people are talking to each other, finding friends, watching things together, talking about those things. That, as you map that onto genres like educational shows or sports shows or watching the Olympics or the elections, that ability to navigate becomes very, very powerful. And we're not an entertainment company. Yes, we do Halo, which is this big video game, but by and large, we're a platform. And so it's the tough software things, whether it's the speech or the ink or the deep graphics, that's where things that take 10 years to get done, the IPTV stuff, the foundation there, it took 10 years to get it done. Now it's finally coming to fruition, and we have people like AT&T betting their company on putting that together. So we're just at the start of having a scale entertainment delivery vehicle both through PCs, unfortunately not connected up to the TV set in most cases, but that's a point of innovation. And now things like IPTV and Xbox that are connected up in the living room.
Steve, you were today, Bill, you weren't here, but Steve showed a new function of Apple TV that brings YouTube directly to the TV. Is there going to be more of that from you? Do you see yourself, the way Bill says, as an enabler of entertainment, or putting aside your Disney role, but your Apple?
I think people want to enjoy their entertainment when they want it and how they want it, on the device that they want it on. So ultimately, that's going to drive the entertainment companies into all sorts of different business models. And that's a good thing. If you're a content company, that's a great thing. More people wanting to enjoy your content more often in more different ways, that's why you're in business. But the transitions are hard sometimes. And the music industry, it turned out that the internet got fast enough to download songs pretty easily. There was no legal alternatives, and maybe they made some bad choices in how they reacted to that. But they're still trying to make the transition to a very different way of doing business or ways of doing business while they're under attack from piracy. And we can all highlight some of the mistakes that have been made, but still, it's a tough job. And Hollywood, I think, has watched what's happened in music, learned some things to do, some things not to do. But they're still trying to map this out. How do they make some of these transitions, some new business models, different platforms, allowing their customers way more freedom on when they want to watch stuff and how they want to watch it. And I think there's a tremendous amount of experimentation and thought going on that's going to be good. That's going to be really good if you're a content owner.
Can I ask about the user interface of the personal computer for a minute? Vista has just come out, which is your best version of Windows you've done, has some UI improvements in it. You're about to do yet another version of the Mac OS called Leopard in the fall, which, from what you've shown publicly, at least so far, has some improvements. But fundamentally, these are still the kind of file icon, folder icon, drop-down menu. I know I'm minimizing. There's a lot of other things. There's gadgets and widgets and all kinds of other cool things in there now. But you can see that it's still all built on what you started with, what Xerox did research on. Is there in the offing in the next 4 or 5 years, is it possible there's a new paradigm for organizing the user interface of the personal computer? Let's leave cell phones and things out for a minute, but just the personal computer, Bill.
One of the things that's been anticipated for a long time is when 3D comes into that interface. And there was a lot of experimentation, sites on the internet where you'd kind of walk around and meet people. But in fact, the richness, the speed, it just didn't sustain itself. Now we're starting to see with some of the mapping stuff, a few of the sites, that the quality of that graphics, the tools and things are getting to the point where 3D can really come in. So I definitely say that when you go to a store, bookstore, you'll be able to see the books lined up, the way you might be interested in, or lined up the way they are in the real store. So 3D is a way of organizing things, particularly as we're getting much more media information on the computer, a lot more choices, a lot more navigation than we've ever had before. And we can take that into this communications world where the PC is playing a much more central role, kind of taking over what was the PBX, sort of one of the last mainframes in the business environment. That'll be a big change that'll come to it. And as we get natural input, that'll cause a change.
And what about this multi-touch stuff? It's really interesting. Obviously, Steve showed some of it on the iPhone when he introduced the iPhone. Steve Ballmer today showed a bunch of it with the Surface computing device. It happens, although it's not part of our program, that HP, which is a sponsor of this conference, has a multi-touch sort of display over here out in the foyer. Will this make its way
that Minority
into,
Report, this kind of thing?
Yeah, will this make its way into, maybe you call it direct manipulation of objects with your hands and your fingers. Will this make its way into mainstream, let's say, laptop computers as a new UI or an additional part of the UI, or is that just a
but go beyond the laptop.
Specialized devices?
Vision, software is doing vision. And so, imagine a game machine where you just can pick up the bat and swing it, or the tennis racket and swing it.
Yeah, we have one of those.
Yeah,
No, that's
we.
not it. You can't pick up your tennis racket
I see what you mean,
and
yeah.
swing it.
Right.
You can't sit there with your friends and do those natural things. That's a 3D positional device. This is video recognition. This is a camera seeing what's going on. And, in a meeting, like you're on a video conference, you don't know who's speaking when they're audio only, things like that. The camera will be ubiquitous. Now, of course, we have to design it in a way that people's expectations about privacy are handled appropriately. But software can do vision, and it can do it very, very inexpensively. And that means this stuff becomes pervasive. You don't just talk about it being in a laptop device. You talk about it being part of the meeting room or the living room or...
But on the laptop, the way that, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is what we have is great and we don't need any new big radical change. But when I turn on my laptop, whether it's my Vista laptop or my Mac laptop, it's there have been improvements, but it's a lot like it was 10 years ago. It's much better. The graphics are better and all that.
You talked about that radical change.
You have the mouse.
For both your companies.
You have the icons you move around. You have and you talked about what a big gamble it was in '84 to do that and then follow on with Windows. We still essentially have that approach, and I'm just wondering, is that going to change?
Touch, ink, speech, vision, those things come in, but they don't come in as a radical substitute. I think you're also underestimating the degree of evolution because you've lived with it year by year. Say we'd sent you away for 10 years and you came back and you said, wow, there's a search paradigm, and that's more at the center of how you find these things. There's tagging, that's more at the center of how you find these things. The evolution is a very good thing. In fact, even in that evolution, the stuff we did with Office, there's this balance you strike where when you make a change, in that case the ribbon, you're going to have some users who feel like, oh, geez, I have to spend a little bit time to be brought along to that. As but there has been good evolution. But these natural interface things are the revolutionary change, and they'll be very revolutionary. That together with the 3D that I talked about.
Steve? I know you're working on something. It's going to be beautiful. We'll see it soon.
Yeah, you know,
And you can't talk about it, but Bill discusses all his secret plans. You don't discuss any of
I
them.
know, it's not fair, but it's, I think the question is a very simple one, which is how much of the really revolutionary things people are going to do in the next 5 years are done on the PCs, or how much of it is really focused on the post-PC devices. And there's a real temptation to focus it on the post-PC devices because it's a clean slate, and because they're more focused devices, and because they don't have the legacy of these zillions of apps that have to run in zillions of markets. And so I think there's going to be tremendous revolution in the experiences of the post-PC devices. And the question is how much to do in the PCs. And I'm sure Microsoft is. We're working on some really cool stuff, but some of it has to be tempered a little bit because you do have, these tens of millions in our case, or hundreds of millions in Bill's case, users that are familiar with something that, they don't want a car with 6 wheels. They like the car with 4 wheels. They don't want to drive with a joystick. They like the steering wheel. And so, you have to, as Bill was saying, in some cases you have to augment what exists there, and in some cases you can replace things. But I think the radical rethinking of things is going to happen in a lot of these post-PC devices.
I'm going to ask a more personal question. We have just a minute before we're going to open up for questions. What's the greatest, I'm not going to call this the Barbara Walters moment and ask you what tree you'd like to be, but
You would love to be Barbara Walters, let me just tell you.
No, I would not. What's the greatest misunderstanding? Right. But thank you, Steve. About your relationship. I mean, you're obviously going to go down in history as